So it leaves the question, where did the idea come from that there was a first woman at all? Because the alphabet didn't invent that from nothing. It's drawing on an interpretive tradition that had been developing in Jewish scholarship for some time now. And to understand that, we need to look at the book of Exodus. Because here's something that's puzzled readers of Genesis for a very long time. And I want to walk through it carefully because it's genuinely interesting regardless of where you land on it. And I alluded to this a little bit in my Cain video, if you've seen that, about there potentially being other human beings before Adam and Eve or alongside them. This is, I guess, one of the pitfalls of that. But these people essentially looked at Genesis 1 and looked at chapter 1 verse 27. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. So male and female are created together in the same verse, and then you go to Genesis chapter 2, and then there's no woman in the picture at the start. Adam is formed from the dust, he's placed in the garden, he's given the job of tending it, and not told to eat from one particular tree. So then he names all the animals and all that. Then God's just like, in verse 18, well, it's not good for you to be alone. I'm going to make a helper fit for you. Adam falls asleep. God takes one of his ribs. Boom, woman is created. She's later named Eve. So there's like two essentially accounts of creation in the first two chapters of Genesis, and they seem to describe the creation of women differently. Because in chapter 1, male and female are created simultaneously, and then in chapter 2, like, woman comes later from a rib as Adam's response, or as a response to Adam's loneliness, rather. As I said in that video, the mainstream reading in contemporary scholarship, especially conservative scholarship, is that these are not two separate events. Chapter 1 just gives you like the overview of the creation, and then chapter 2 zooms into, gives you the details of the 6 days in creation of humanity specifically, arguing that they're the same event just told at different sort of scales. But there's a different reading that developed in the medieval sort of Jewish interpretive tradition. What if they are describing two different events? What if the women in chapter 1 created simultaneously with Adam from the same earth before any mention of a rib is a different person from the woman in chapter 2? So if you kind of take that reading, then Genesis 1 is describing a first woman who then completely disappears from the text without any explanation. And so then the question that naturally follows that is, well, where did she go? And of course, Lilith, I cannot say that word, guys. Every time I say it, it's like Lilith, whatever. Lilith is the answer to the tradition that developed from that. So this is how the first wife mythology actually gets constructed. It's, they're reading this and a response to a perceived textual problem in Genesis, and then they produced a theological inference, and then the inference eventually found its way into the alphabet of Ben Sira as a full narrative or joke. I know that was a lot right there, but again, this reading of Genesis it's not the mainstream one for obvious reasons. No one thinks that Lilith was real. Well, maybe not anymore. The two account structure in Genesis 1 and 2 has good explanations that don't require a missing first wife of Adam, but the fact that the reading develops tells us something real about how ancient medieval interpreters were engaging with the scriptures. Like they were paying close attention, and they were noticing apparent tensions and contradictions and all that, and just writing out explanations for them. It just, in this case, produced a mythology that then took a life entirely of its own. For those of you who did see my video on the potential humans before Adam and Eve, and a lot of serious biblical scholars think that it was indeed possible, this also isn't what I was saying. For example, I was more so sharing the idea that Genesis 1 had less to do with creation ex nihilo, so to speak, like this creation of Lilith and Adam at the same time debacle, and it was more about assigning a function for creation. Essentially, the functional reading of Genesis 1 is if Genesis 1 isn't describing the material sequence of creation at all, i.e. that's not the point of it, then there's no first woman hiding in it to begin with. But that's a longer conversation for a different video. But I do want to do a video on the two creation accounts of Genesis 1 and 2, and the different views on that whole thing, especially because Genesis 1, there's just so much juice in there. No pun intended. But let me know if that's something that you'd actually be interested in. But nonetheless, I digress. But now we get to the part of the story where, I find this really strange, and that, for some reason, almost nobody mentions when they talk about Lilith. If the first wife story isn't in the Bible, and, it isn't, then is Lilith in the Bible at all? Well, yes, actually, exactly once, in a single verse, in a book that has nothing to do with Adam or Eve or the Garden of Eden. Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14. And I want to read you the passage in context because it's the context that is everything here. Isaiah 34 is what scholars call a judgment oracle. It's a section of the book where the prophet Isaiah is describing what's going to happen to the enemies of God. The specific target here in this chapter is Edom, which, if you see my Obadiah video, great, you get it. A nation that is descended from Esau, Jacob's brother, with a long and complicated history of conflict with Israel. And the chapter describes what Edom is going to look like after God is done with it. Let's start in verse 11. But the hawk and the porcupine shall possess it. The owl and the raven shall dwell in it. Thorns shall grow over its strongholds, nettles and thistles in its fortresses. It shall be the haunt of jackals, an abode for ostriches. And wild animals shall meet with hyenas. The wild goat shall cry to his fellow. Indeed, there the Lilith shall alight and find herself a resting place. And it is that word Lilith. That's it. That's the entire appearance of Lilith. One word in a list of desert creatures and supernatural beings that are going to inhabit the ruins of a destroyed city. Now, look at how different Bible translations handle it, because the difference is rather interesting to note. The KJV Bible, for you KJV onlyers, says screech owl. The ESV says nightbird. The NASB says night monster. The NIV footnotes have it say possibly Lilith. Most translators didn't even use the name because the Hebrew word Lilith, related to Lail, the word for night, is ambiguous at best. It might refer to a specific Mesopotamian demon figure. It also just might mean the creature of the night. But the theological work of the verse is, or what it's doing, is not ambiguous at all. And actually, that's the more interesting thing here. Isaiah is working within a specific literary tradition that appears across multiple prophetic books, what scholars call the desolation passage. It's a prophetic work where destroyed cities are described as being inhabited by wild animals, desert creatures, and supernatural beings from the chaos realm. So you find the same vocabulary in Isaiah chapter 13, which describes the devastation of Babylon. You also find it again in Jeremiah chapter 50, which is also about Babylon. There's a consistent cast of characters across these passages. There's the Siyim, or desert dwellers, the Iyim, howling creatures, the Se'irim, the hairy ones, like the goat demons that appear in Leviticus in connection with the illegitimate sacrifice thing. And then here in Isaiah 34, there's Lilith. I apologize if I butchered all the names, just forgive me. So what is the prophet actually communicating here? Well, the key phrase here, and this is, the thing that clicked for me when I was researching this, is counterhuman world. The desolation passages aren't just a poetic way of saying that the city is just going to be empty. They're saying something rather specific about what kind of empty that it is, if that makes sense. Let me explain. In the ancient world, the wilderness wasn't just uninhabited land. It was the domain of chaos. The periphery of the ordered world, essentially the place where the structures of creation broke down into disorder. So a city, in this context, isn't just a collection of buildings. It's an expression of human civilization, of ordered life, of God's blessing on a people. So when a city is reduced to wilderness, it hasn't just been emptied, it had been returned to chaos, essentially handed back to the anti-creation order. Remember when God told Adam and Eve to make the rest of the world like Eden? It's the same idea. Eden was the pinnacle of order. Like, this is where God dwelled with humanity. The rest of the world was chaos and untamed. God told humanity to rule and have subdue and have dominion over it. Translation, bring order to chaos, just as God did with the universe. Going back to that Genesis 1 idea, taking this creation, forming order out of it. The presence of these chaos creatures in the ruins signals that judgment isn't only military or political. God has withdrawn his ordering presence from the place. So the structures of civilization are gone, and what moves in to fill the vacuum are the beings of chaos, the things that belong to the wilderness realm rather than the human one. Because if you think about what the wilderness actually was, it's like there's so much death there. It's kind of the same way they viewed the sea and chaos. It was just like no humans can live out there. So it's just like these guys, these animals are just eating dead things. So it's just not seen as like a human civilization. That's kind of the idea, if that makes sense. So that's what Lilith is doing in Isaiah 34. Her appearance in the ruins of Edom, alongside the owls and jackals and desert demons, tells the reader that God is done here. This place has been abandoned to the chaos realm.